Bhagavate Vasudeva. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiriye. Ashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So continuing with the discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 10, the nature of fruitive activity. Text 8 onwards. Vilakshana sthula sukshma dehadatmekshita sudrik yatha agnirdarunodaya dahako anya prakashaka. Just as fire which burns and illuminates is different from firewood, which is to be burnt to give illumination. Similarly, the seer within the body, the self-enlightened spirit soul, is different from the material body, which is to be illuminated by consciousness. Thus, the spirit soul and the body possess different characteristics and are different entities. So that is, we know that spirit soul is different from the body. Body is made of 5 gross, 3 subtle elements. Spirit soul is made of Satchit and Ananda. So we have to see it differently. It is analytically demonstrated in this verse that one should never falsely identify the ego with the material body. Such misidentification is called false ego or material illusion. The following question may be raised. Since it is commonly known that the Supreme Personality of Godhead enlightens the conditioned soul, why is the term Swadrik or self-enlightened used in this verse? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that although the Supreme Personality of Godhead certainly furnishes consciousness to the living entity being endowed with the potency of the Lord has himself the capacity to revive and expand his pure consciousness. He may therefore be considered in a secondary sense self-enlightened. The example may be given that gold or silver domes brilliantly reflect the rays of the sun. Although the light comes from the sun, the inherent properties of gold and silver can also be considered causes for the brilliant reflection, since other substances do not possess suitable properties to reflect the sun's light. Similarly, the spirit soul can be considered Swadrik or self-enlightened because he possesses characteristics by which he can brilliantly reflect the potency of the personality of Godhead. So here the characteristic is how much surrendered the spirit soul is. Then through him, the Lord can enlighten him and can enlighten others also. Nirodhotpatti anu brihanam nanatvam tatkritan gunam anta pravishta adhatta evam deh gunan paraha. Just as fire may appear differently as dormant, manifest, weak, brilliant, and so on, according to the condition of the fuel. Similarly, the spirit soul enters a material body and accepts particular bodily characteristics. Although fire may appear and disappear within a particular object, the element fire always exists. Similarly, the eternal soul appears within a suitable body and then disappears from that body, but the soul always exists, whether inside the body or outside. Just as fire is different from its fuel, the soul is different from the body. A match makes a tiny fire, whereas the explosion of a huge gasoline tank will send flames shooting up into the sky, but still fire is one. Similarly, one spirit soul may appear in the body of Brahma and another in the body of man, but the spirit soul is qualitatively the same in every body. Because of ignorance, we impose a bodily characteristics upon us. And thus we say that a particular person is American, Russian, Chinese, African, or Mexican, or that he's old or young. Although such designations certainly apply to the body, they do not apply to the spirit soul, which is described here as para, or a transcendental entity. As long as a bewildered spirit soul remains inimical to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the designations of the gross and subtle bodies will wrap themselves around him, keeping him in darkness. If one intellectually identifies oneself with various materialistic philosophies of life, he becomes covered by the subtle mind. So the spirit soul, it's a bewildered spirit soul, or a conditioned spirit soul. He enters the body, or he or the spirit soul enters the body, or the body, first a subtle body takes a shape according to the consciousness the spirit soul has acquired, and then the gross body takes the shape. But the spirit soul starts identifying with the body. That's where the problem is. Yo aso gunair virachito deho ayam purushasya hi samsarastanni bandho ayam punso vidya chidatmanah. The subtle and gross material bodies are created by the material modes of nature, which expand from the potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Material existence occurs when the living entity falsely accepts the qualities of the gross and subtle bodies as being his own factual nature. This illusory state, however, can be destroyed by real knowledge. Regarding the analogy comparing fire and its fuel to the soul and the body, one may argue that to some extent fire is dependent upon its fuel and cannot exist without it. Since we do not experience the existence of fire independent of fuel, one may therefore still question how it is possible for the living entity to exist separately from the body, become covered by it, and eventually become free from it. So living entity to exist separately from the bodies, because we have always seen body and the living entities together. Only through the Supreme Personality of Godhead, knowledge potency, which is Vidya, can one clearly understand the nature of the living entity. By Vidya or real knowledge, one may cut material existence to pieces and even in this lifetime experience spiritual reality. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, our material existence is an artificial imposition by the Lord's inconceivable potency of nescience. The qualities of gross and subtle material forms are psychologically imposed upon the living being, and because of misidentification with the body, the living entity initiates a series of illusory activities. As explained in the previous chapter, the present material body is like a tree that produces the karmic seeds of the next body. However, this cycle of ignorance can be cut to pieces by the transcendental knowledge explained by the Lord. So this cycle of ignorance, and it has been going on millions and millions of lifetimes. But we have to come to the understanding, I'm not this body. I'm not this gross body, and I'm not this subtle body either. I'm a spirit soul, servant of Krishna. Unfortunately, the conditioned souls, being inimical to the Supreme Personality of God, do not accept the perfect knowledge spoken by the Lord. Instead, they remain absorbed in gross and subtle illusion. But if the living entity accepts the Lord's knowledge, his whole situation can be rectified, and he can return to his original blissful eternal life of perfect knowledge. But that's a big if. And it takes a long time. Bahunam Janamanam Ante Jnanvan Mam Prapadyate. To many, many lifetimes, one who has a perfect knowledge, he surrenders unto me. Tasmat jigyasayatmanam atmastham kevalam param sangamya nerase teda vastu buddhim yatha kramam. Therefore, by the cultivation of knowledge, one should approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead situated within oneself. By understanding the Lord's pure transcendental existence, one should gradually give up the false vision of the material world as independent reality. So even material world, just as material body is dependent, material world is dependent on the Lord. The word yatha kramam means that after first realizing oneself to be different from the gross material body, one should then progressively detach oneself from material mental activities. In this verse, etad vastu buddhim means seeing the material world as existing independently rather than correctly seeing all things as emanations of the absolute truth. So this is how one makes progress. When one correctly identifies oneself as eternal spiritual form, one achieves the real fruit of knowledge. The Lord is eternally manifest in his eternal form, and the living entity is similarly manifest in his eternal form as a loving servitor of the Lord. When we falsely assume that temporary, illusory material objects are real, knowledge of our eternal spiritual form is covered by ignorance. If, however, one meditates upon the Lord's supreme presence within everything, one can return to the normal, blissful state of spiritual life. So this is what the goal of life is. Not to increase our ignorance. That's why it is in asato ma sadgamaya. Means asato ma sadgamaya. Means from asat to go to sat. From falsehood or temporariness, go to the eternality as actual truth. That is what we have to do. Acharya arani radhyasya ante vasyutarari tatsandhanam pravachanam vidya sandhi sukavaha. The spiritual master can be compared to the lower kindling stick, the disciple to the upper kindling stick, and the instruction given by the guru to the third stick placed in between. The transcendental knowledge communicated from guru to disciple is compared to the fire arising from the contact of this, which burns the darkness of ignorance to ashes, bringing great happiness to both guru and disciple. So lower kindling stick, guru, because the fire will go up. And when the fire arising, and the instructions in the middle, and the upper one is the disciple. So the fire arises, and then the ignorance is burned to ashes. When the darkness of ignorance is burned to ashes, the dangerous life of ignorance is also eradicated, and one can work for his true self-interest and full knowledge. In this verse, the word Adya means original. It indicates a spiritual master who's compared to the sacred kindling stick held below. From the spiritual master, transcendental knowledge, like fire, is spread to the disciple, just as friction between two sticks of firewood produces fire. Similarly, bona fide contact between the spiritual master, who's a representative of Krishna, and his sincere disciple produces the fire of knowledge. When the disciple takes shelter of the lotus feet of the spiritual master, he automatically acquires perfect knowledge of his original spiritual form. So this is how we get the knowledge, but we have to get the knowledge, and only when we surrender to a bona fide spiritual master, we get the right knowledge, which removes complete ignorance. Otherwise, there is so much of ignorance throughout the world. Even those who say, I have a guru and I have this guru, I have that guru. But we have to see what kind of knowledge he is getting. Vaisharadi sati vishuddha buddhir dhanoti mayam gunasam prasutam gunasha sandaya yadatma metat swayam cha shayam samidya thagnihi. By submissively hearing from an expert spiritual master, the expert disciple develops pure knowledge, which repels the onslaught of material illusion arising from the three modes of material nature. Finally, this pure knowledge itself ceases, just as fire ceases when the stock of fuel has been consumed. The Sanskrit word Vaisharadi means that which is derived from the expert, Vaisharad. Perfect transcendental knowledge comes from the expert spiritual master, and when such knowledge is heard by the expert disciple, it curbs the waves of material illusion. The material illusion, first illusion is I am this body, and then the waves of so much of desires, material desires, it just curbs, it just stops them. Since the Lord's illusory energy acts eternally within the material world, there is no possibility of destroying illusion. One may, however, destroy the presence of illusion within one's own heart. To accomplish this, the disciple must become expert in pleasing the expert spiritual master. As one advances to the perfectional stage of Krishna consciousness, experiencing the presence of Lord everywhere, one's attention shifts to the transcendental platform. At that time, pure knowledge itself, one's constant technical awareness of illusion diminishes. Just as fire diminishes and is extinguished after consuming its stock of fuel. So this is what happens when one gets knowledge, when he makes advancement, when he realizes that knowledge, then the fire or the waves of the material illusion, they just diminish and extinguish completely. Srila Madhvacharya has quoted from several Vedic scriptures to show that Maya or material illusion is just like a witch who always haunts the conditioned souls. Maya offers the conditioned souls whatever they like within the three modes of nature. But such offerings are all just like fire that burns the heart to ashes. Plus, burns the heart to ashes means burns all the real knowledge that is there in the heart. This is what Maya does. Therefore, one must understand that the material world is a hellish place, offering a permanent situation to no one. Externally, we experience many things, and internally, we contemplate our experience, formulating plans for future action. Thus, internally and externally, we are victims of ignorance. Real knowledge comes from the Vedas, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his form of perfect wisdom. If we become fully Krishna conscious, taking complete shelter of the Lord, there will be no scarcity of pleasure, because the Lord is a reservoir of all pleasure. And his devotees freely move within that reservoir. Not just freely move, they just jump and take complete pleasure. They're blissful. But this ignorance starting from I am this body and this material world is for me to enjoy, that is Maya. Can never enjoy here. And as it is said, one must understand the material world is actually a hellish place. And even if we think, oh, that's okay, I can live here, even if it is hellish, it is still temporary. Cannot live here permanently. Means cannot live here in any particular body permanently. We have to keep on changing bodies. So I know there's so much to discuss, but today I'm feeling very tired, so I think we can stop, yeah? See anybody has any questions or comments? Okay, you all have a safe and wonderful day.
Hope you feel good.